Good morning. Okay, so two of my favorite books that have ever been written are Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte and Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And I've always been fascinated that these two amazing books were written by sisters. What are the chances that two literary geniuses are born into the same family and harness their talents like that? So I decided I went down this little rabbit hole asking AI questions because I wanted to learn about Charlotte and Emily Bronte because I kind of had romanticized them in my mind. And what I learned was pretty interesting. And one thing, I'm making this video to share with you what I learned. But one thing that I discovered that was the most kind of surprising to me was that there was a third sister. I'm not the most well-read person. Maybe other people, a lot of other really well-read people who love classic literature probably most definitely already know this fact, that there was a third sister, Anne Bronte, and she was just as famous in her time and just as successful in her time. But another surprising twist of events was why she is so much less known. So I'm going to share with you what I learned from my digging. Well, pretty much just me and AI asking questions, and hopefully you find it interesting too. So we're going to learn just more about the Bronte family, more about Anna Bronte and how she kind of got buried and forgotten, or Anne Bronte. And Patrick Bronte, so their father, Patrick Bronte, he was an Irish-born Anglican clergyman and writer. He was born poor, he was self-educated, and he earned a scholarship to go to St. John's College, Cambridge. In 1820, he was appointed the perpetual curate of Hawthorne, a remote village in Yorkshire. He was, AI described him as eccentric, but a devoted father. He encouraged his children to read broadly, follow politics, and write freely. Him and his wife had 6 children, but his wife passed away when all of his children were very, very small. And Patrick ended up outliving all 6 of his children. So yeah, the wife died in 1821. The 2 oldest children ended up dying in 1825, leaving 4 children. So the remaining 4 children grew up in isolation at the edge of Yorkshire moors. To cope, they invented an interactive fantasy world. So the sisters briefly worked as governesses, and they did not like working as governesses. But lucky for them, they inherited a large amount of money, which made it where they didn't really need to work. So in 1847, well, just a little side note, they used the money that they inherited there was 1 brother and 3 girls, right? So Charlotte, Anne, and Emily used this small fortune that they had inherited to publish a joint book of poetry in 1847. It was successfully published. They secretly published it. Their father and their brother did not know about this, under male pseudonyms, because it was a lot harder to get published as a woman. It was a lot harder to get publishers to take you seriously as a woman. So they all used fakes and pretended to be men, and they were able to get this book of poetry published. Then they tried to start their own school. They were all very educated girls, but their school failed. But they didn't really need to work, and their father was very, very supportive of just their creative endeavors, and they had free housing, and they had chores and they worked around the house. But anyways, their school failed. And so let's talk a little bit about the brother. The brother was the star of the family. The sisters went away to study. They went away to school to study, but the brother was educated at home. The father personally educated the son. He was considered to be like the most creative. He was extremely articulate. He wrote endlessly. He was a very gifted painter, so they thought he would, become this famous painter. But he failed as a painter. However you fail as a painter, maybe no one buys your work. But he actually studied formally studied painting. And painting failed. Oh, then he got a really, really good gig as a tutor for a really, really kind of wealthy family. And that ended up anyway, he ended up having an affair with the mother of the family. So yeah, that didn't work out either. And that was a huge scandal. After he ended up being fired from this tutorship job, he was always prone to bouts of depression, and he ended up spiraling into alcoholism and an opium addiction. So he returned home to be taken care of by his families. And so during the day, his sisters would do the housework and take care of their brother, and then all night they would write. And so these sisters were secretly writing novels at night. Why so secretly? But I think we'll get to that. We'll get to that why they didn't want to share. So, okay, we already covered that they had a rich aunt that died and left them money. This aunt actually helped raise them. After their mother died, the aunt moved in with them and helped raise them. They secretly wrote all night. All right, so the rumor has it that the brother died never knowing about the success of his sisters, right? Because they published under pseudonyms. No one knew their true identity. And so I'm stuttering, sorry. So one of the reasons could be, it said that they were very sensitive to their brother's feelings, because he was the star of the family. He was incredibly gifted, incredibly articulate and creative himself, and here he was, an alcoholic, addicted to opiums, and just a complete disaster and mess. So to kind of protect his ego, thinking that him knowing how successful his three sisters were might send him, spiraling and falling back into his addictions even further, they kept it a secret from him. But there's another reason why they may have kept it a secret from him, and that is because their brother was heavily in debt. He had made very, very bad decisions, and women had very little financial autonomy at the time. And so if his creditors found out that he had sisters who were making all this money from these books, they might come after the sisters for payment of their brother's debt. So that might be another reason why they wanted to keep it from as a secret. And also, he kind of when he was he was kind of how did it say? He was kind of volatile and a lot of drama, because of his addictions, and very, very critical. And so if they wrote in secret, they could kind of write with more peace and quiet, and without his harsh criticism and probably emotional and verbal attacks on them. So that was another reason, just so they could pursue their dreams in peace. They would write at night without him knowing. But historians figure he probably knew before he died that his sisters were these brilliant authors that had been published, because there were letters that would arrive to their friends in the mail having been opened, someone opened them before they were mailed and read them. So when the sisters found out that his daughters had been published. I mean, when the father found out that his daughters were published, he was incredibly proud, incredibly supportive, and he outlived all of his children. And even after all of his children died, when guests came to Yorkshire, he would show them around the remaining years as the father of the Bronte sisters. So let's talk about their 3 novels that they published secretly. Okay, so they published a book of poetry in 1847, and then they ended up each getting a novel published. So Charlotte Bronte wrote Jane Eyre, and it was immediately runaway commercial success, blockbuster hit, huge, right? Then there was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and it was the reception of Wuthering Heights was very, very polarized at the time. Now, today, it stands equal in acclaim with Jane Eyre, but at the time it was very polarized. People described it as brutal. It had a lack of moral lesson. It was unchristian. I can't decide which of the 2 books are my favorite, Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights. I have yet to read Anne's big book. It's on my list, so I'm going to get there. So Emily died kind of thinking, believe her book was a failure. She died, it wasn't until later that people would just kind of see she was super, super ahead of her time. All right, so, and then there was Agnes Grey by Anne. And see, these books were published in a box set together. And so Anne's first book, Agnes Grey, was just completely overshadowed by Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. But later, in 1848, Agnes published another book. Oh, what was it? It's called The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And it was about a wife who married a man who was an abusive alcoholic, and she ends up leaving him and raising their child on her own. And this was just scandalous, a woman leaving her husband, raising her child on the home, no matter how bad the home situation was. So, and it was a shocking scandal. It sold out in 6 weeks, rivaling the popularity of Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre was a gothic and passionate and poetic novel. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was a psychologically gritty, realistic, and structurally brilliant novel. So, and a lot of it was based on her experience with her brother, what was her brother's name again? No, I can't remember. Okay. So, based on her experience with her brother. So, she had like a front row seat, and she just described these behaviors of a true addict. Okay, so within less than a year after their breakthrough success, between 1848 and mid-1849, Branwell, there's a brother's name, Branwell, Emily, and Anne all died of tuberculosis. Okay, so this is the thing that really surprised me. Why did Anne? She had this, the tenant of, gosh, I'm going to read it, but I can't remember the name of her. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. It was just as popular as Jane Eyre, right? Pretty much, Jane Eyre's sales were a little bit higher. Why do we not remember Anne? Why do not as many people know about The Tenant of Wildfell Hall? Well, in 1849, all of her siblings were dead. Charlotte had power of attorney, I guess. She just had taken all business affairs for the family. The father she was a very competent person. The father just handed her all control. And in 1849, Charlotte blocked the republication of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, saying the choice of subject was a mistake and shouldn't be preserved. So she would not allow a second edition of it, and it was forgotten. 100 years later, scholars finally tracked down the original 1848 copies and gave it its proper due. Charlotte married in 1854, but died just a year later from pregnancy complications. So now I'm just gonna, this is a little bit of a side note. whenever I kind of admire people, or just, I don't know, want to get to know more about them, I'm always for whatever reason, very curious about their faith and religious beliefs and practices and convictions, and that side of them. So I asked some questions about that, and I'm going to give you a brief little breakdown of what AI said about each of these 4 siblings. Charlotte aligned the most with her father. She despised his hypocrisy, believed in a loving God. She had a deep distrust of the Catholic Church. She believed in duty, integrity, and endurance through suffering. She believed that more than like some spiritual manifestations all the time. So, Anna Bronte was the most outward devout and pious of the siblings, and her personal beliefs were the most theologically radical. She was, when she was younger, Calvinism always gave her a lot of anxiety. The idea that, you have to find out if you're saved or not because God's already made up his mind. And she ended up deciding she believed in, she believed in universal salvation, that in the end all of us will be saved. And I'm LDS, and that makes a lot of sense, like if you believe in, the 3 degrees of glory, ultimately, yeah, we are, that makes sense. Anyways, to me. All right, so, Patrick, oh, is his name Patrick? No, Branwell, okay, so the brother, he was a tormented skeptic who preferred the local tavern to church. He flirted with skepticism and bohemianism and was critical of his father's church. But on his deathbed, he earnestly whispered amen to all of his father's prayers. So he was just pretty much a tormented soul. I want to talk a little bit more about Emily because I think I really like to romanticize things, and I like to romanticize people, but just from the things I did learn about her, listening to AI answer my questions, she just became really intriguing to me. And Charlotte and Anne, they were willing to engage with the public. They were willing to eventually let their identities be known and go to dinner parties and social with other, writers of the time. Emily was, she did not care at all about society, money, or public approval. She wrote out of pure internal necessity of creating. She was reclusive and uncompromising. Her spirit belonged entirely to the wild Yorkshire moors, where she'd walk for miles with her giant mastiff, whose name was Keeper. She was furious about being discovered and indifferent to Wuthering Heights' success or failure. Okay, when she became sick, she refused all medical advice, medicine, or doctors, and continued her household chores until she could barely walk. And like I said, when she refused to go to London with Charlotte and Anne to reveal their identities. So, there were other books of poetry, of Emily's poetry that were published, but mainly at Charlotte's insistence. There's just such different personalities in this family. Anyways, Patrick the son. Does he go by Patrick, or does he go by, what's that other name? Branwell. And I don't know. We'll just call him Patrick. Maybe he's Patrick Jr. Okay, so Patrick the son died at age 31. Emily died at age 30. Anne died at the age of 29. And Charlotte Bronte died at the age of 38. 3 of the siblings died within an 8-month span between 1848 and mid-1849. So, there you have it. I don't know why that intrigued me so much. And I realized there was another great writer in the Bronte family, Anne Bronte, that we don't hear about, we don't talk about. I didn't even know about her I don't know when I'll get around to it, but I'm excited to read or listen to her book, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And if you watch this video, I hope you found that interesting too. Bye.